Imagine stepping into a forest so mysterious, so dark, it doesn't even appear on any map. A place where the trees twist and shift like they're alive, and the air itself seems to breathe with something unseen, something hungry. That's where Thomas and I found ourselves, trapped in a nightmare that swallowed every ounce of hope. Hours later, when we thought we'd escaped, I realized the true horror had only just begun. What followed us out of that forest wasn't human. It wasn't natural. And it definitely wasn't going anywhere. Stay with me. You won't believe what happens next. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that follow button and support this channel. The deeper the story, the darker it gets, so don't miss a moment. I wasn't supposed to be out that late. It was nearly 7 p.m. when I gave up on the photo shoot. Heavy clouds rolled in fast, swallowing what little light was left in the sky. I had driven nearly 4 hours east of Portland hoping to get sunset shots over the ridge. Nothing but rain, mud, and disappointment. As I made my way back down the winding service road, my GPS started glitching. Signal bars dropped to 0. Music cut out. The screen froze on a pale green blur of forest. I muttered under my breath and kept driving. That's when I passed it. A narrow dirt road broke off from the main path, right after mile marker 43. It wasn't paved. No signs. Just 2 tire tracks carved into damp earth, with the forest growing tight around both sides. It looked more like a forgotten logging trail than anything else. I wouldn't have noticed it if the trees hadn't parted so strangely at the entrance, like someone had pulled them back just enough to say, "Look here." I don't know why I stopped. Maybe it was the silence, or the way the air suddenly felt still. The kind of still that presses down on your skin. No wind. No sound. Just me and that opening. I backed up, stared down the road. Something in my chest said no. But my hand turned off the ignition anyway. I got out. Pulled the camera bag from the back seat and slung it over my shoulder. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was just me being stubborn. But I started walking down that path with my boots crunching into damp pine needles. The deeper I went, the more I realized how wrong everything felt. The trees here were identical. Same height. Same width. Same perfect spacing between trunks. I paused, took a few photos. But they didn't capture it. The lens made it look like any other patch of woods, but my eyes told a different story. There were no birds. No rustling. Not even the hum of insects. Just an awful stillness. Like the entire forest was holding its breath. I checked my phone. Dead black screen. Not low battery. Just dead. That was the first time I felt the pull to turn back. But I didn't. I kept walking. Then I saw it. About 50 feet ahead, nailed to a tree with rusted spikes, was an old wooden sign. Weather-worn. Faded almost to nothing. I stepped closer and squinted. The letters weren't English. They weren't even letters, really. Jagged symbols carved in lines that seemed to shift if I stared too long. I snapped a picture. The camera shutter echoed too loud in the quiet. That's when I noticed the dirt under the sign had been disturbed. Like someone, or something, had been digging there. A shape moved between the trees up ahead. I froze. Not an animal. Too tall. Too slow. It stepped out of sight before I could focus. I wanted to call out, but my throat dried up. I turned around, ready to leave. But the trail behind me looked different. Where I thought I came from, there was only more forest now. And the light was fading fast. I stood still for too long. My legs wouldn't move. Every part of me screamed to run, but I couldn't figure out where to go. The way back was gone. Or at least, It didn't look like how I remembered it. The path had closed in, swallowed by trees that hadn't been there a minute ago. I told myself I'd just taken a wrong turn. That I was tired. Disoriented. But some part of me, deep down, knew that wasn't true. I hadn't turned anywhere. The forest had changed. I tried retracing my steps anyway. Walked 20 yards, 30. But there was no clearing. No tire tracks. Just the same tightly packed pines. The same carpet of brown needles underfoot. The same awful silence. Then I noticed something else. The trees were too perfect. Exactly the same distance apart. Each trunk the same thickness. The same height. No natural undergrowth. No variation. It was like walking through a model forest built by hand. The kind you'd find in a movie set or a theme park, except there were no tracks, no lights, no signs of construction. I took another photo. Then another. When I checked the preview screen, both were corrupted. A black smear across the image, like ink dragged across the lens. That's when I stopped breathing. Something brushed my shoulder. I spun around, heart punching my ribs, but there was nothing behind me. No branch. No twig. Nothing. I backed up slowly. My breath loud in the stillness. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. Soft. Slow. Crunching the pine needles. Not mine. Coming closer. I held up the camera like a shield, blinking fast to keep my vision clear. The footsteps stopped. Then I saw him. A man, maybe late 40s. Dirty flannel shirt. Mud on his jeans. Standing half in shadow behind a tree. He stared at me, eyes wide, hands empty. I forced my voice to work. Hey. You lost too? He didn't answer right away. Just blinked. Then nodded once slowly. I've been trying to find the road, I said. It's gone. There was a trail back there. I think we... No trail, he said, voice raspy. Not anymore. What is this place? He looked past me, then back to my eyes. I don't know. But you shouldn't be here. Neither should you, I said. He glanced down at my camera. That thing still work? Kind of. Don't take pictures, he said. I frowned. Why? He didn't answer. Just turned and started walking away, deeper into the trees. Wait, do you know how to get out? He kept walking. I hesitated. Then followed. It was better than standing there alone. But the trees were getting closer together. Growing tighter. Like the forest didn't want us to keep going. And behind us, the footsteps had started again. I followed him through the trees, careful not to step too loud. He moved like he'd done it 100 times. Quiet. Calculated. Like someone who already knew which parts of the forest would snap underfoot. I didn't know his name. Didn't know if I could trust him. But I figured if he'd survived this long, he knew more than I did. After maybe 10 minutes of walking, he stopped in a clearing. There was nothing special about it at first. Just a circle of dead pine needles and a mossy log. But the silence felt heavier here. Like the air had weight. He sat on the log and stared straight ahead. I stayed standing. What's your name? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, finally, Thomas. Ethan. No handshake. No smile. He didn't even look at me. How long have you been here? He didn't blink. I think 2 days. Maybe 3. Not sure anymore. I glanced at his clothes. Streaked with mud, but dry. His boots looked untouched. No wear. No dirt in the laces. Something didn't add up. You got any supplies? Food? Water? No. No bag? He didn't answer. That's when I noticed something else. No phone. No wallet. Not even keys. Just him sitting there, like he'd dropped out of the sky. You said there's no trail anymore, I said. What do you mean? He looked at me then. Eyes dull. Hollow. It moves, he said. The forest. It changes when you're not looking. That's not possible. It doesn't care what's possible. I felt a chill crawl up my back. Then how do we leave? You don't, he said. You just get deeper. The more you try to leave, the further in you go. My throat tightened. That can't be true. There's got to be some way. You think I haven't tried? He snapped. I walked in a straight line for 6 hours. Same trees. Same signs. Same silence. He leaned forward. Tell me something, Ethan. What direction did you come from? I opened my mouth. Closed it. I didn't know. I didn't remember turning around. Or taking a curve. I'd just been following what I thought was the path. He nodded like he already knew. Then he froze. I followed his gaze. On the other side of the clearing, standing just at the edge of the trees, was a figure. Still. Tall. I couldn't make out details. Just long arms and something like a head tilted slightly to the side. What is that? I whispered. He didn't move. Didn't speak. We both watched. The figure didn't move either. It just stood there. Waiting. Then, without a sound, it stepped backward into the trees and vanished. I turned to Thomas, but his expression had changed. Pale. Eyes darting. I told you not to take pictures, he said. I didn't. He didn't believe me. I think it knows you're here now. We didn't move for a long time. The clearing felt colder now. The light dimmer. Thomas sat rigid, staring at the spot where the figure had been. I stood behind him, gripping my camera like it was a weapon, even though I knew it wouldn't help. I didn't take a picture, I said again. My voice was quieter this time. He didn't respond. I crouched next to him. What is it? That thing? He swallowed. It doesn't like to be seen. The words hung in the air like a warning. Like he wasn't telling me, he was reminding himself. We need to keep moving, I said. Thomas nodded, slowly. Not through the trees. Not direct. That's how it gets you. What do you mean? He stood up and pointed. We'll go in a spiral. Wide circles. Never straight. That's the only thing that's kept me alive. I followed him again, my legs tense with every step. The woods pressed in tighter, like they were folding around us. The trees were still perfect. Still unnatural. But now I noticed other things too. Little signs. Subtle things. Scratches in the bark, all at the same height. Twigs twisted into loops and knots, hanging from low branches. Small bones. Animal, maybe. Arranged in strange patterns along the path. None of it looked accidental. I stopped walking for just a moment to catch my breath, and that's when I felt it again. The sense of being watched. Not the way you feel when someone glances at you on the street. No, this was heavier. Like something with intent. Hunger. I turned slowly. Nothing there. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement, high up in the trees. Branches swayed, but there was no wind. Thomas hissed from up ahead. Don't look at it. I faced forward again, heart racing. What happens if I do? I asked. He didn't turn around. It learns your face. I stopped asking questions. We kept walking. The spiral path didn't make sense in my head. It felt like we were going in circles. But Thomas seemed certain. He counted paces under his breath. Checked the sky. Adjusted direction like he was following a map only he could see. Then we reached another clearing. This one was different. At the center was an old tent, collapsed, soaked with rain, nearly swallowed by moss and dirt. It looked like it had been there for years. I approached slowly. Inside, I found a rusted lantern, torn clothing, and an old flip phone with the screen shattered. No signs of who it belonged to. But the weirdest part was the journal. Soaked, but still legible. The last page read, "It only lets one leave. Never two." I looked up at Thomas. He was already staring at me. Thomas didn't blink. He just stood there, staring like he was waiting for something. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. The journal was still in my hands, damp and trembling slightly. "It only lets one leave. Never two." I read it again. The words didn't feel like a warning. They felt like a rule. Something old. Something binding. "You knew this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He said nothing. I stepped away from the tent, holding his gaze. "How long have you known?" "A while," he said. His tone was flat. No guilt. No emotion. Just fact. I felt cold. "Why didn't you tell me? If I told you back there," he said, nodding toward the woods, "you would have run. Or worse, you'd have stopped trusting me. And that thing out there, it feeds on panic." I took a shaky breath. "So what now? You planning to leave me here?" He looked away. "I don't want to. But if it's true, if that's the rule." I backed up. "You don't even know if it's real. It could have been written by someone losing their mind." He nodded slowly. "Maybe. But that tent didn't set itself up. Someone was here before us. And now they're not." I scanned the clearing again. The bones. The silence. The way the trees circled this place, just slightly curved inward like they'd grown towards something at the center. Then I noticed something else. There were two backpacks by the tent. Both moldy, worn from time, but definitely two. "Thomas," I said carefully, pointing. He turned, saw them. "Two people were here," I said. "One stayed behind. The other, maybe they made it." He moved toward the tent, crouched, picked up one of the rotting bags. The zipper broke in his hand. "You think one of them escaped?" he asked. "Maybe." We both stood in silence for a moment. Then the trees behind us shifted. Just slightly. Not the wind. Not natural. The same figure from before stood just beyond the trunks again. No closer. No further. Just watching. And this time, Thomas saw it too. "We need to go," he said. But I couldn't stop staring at it. Its limbs weren't right. Too long. Joints bending the wrong way. Its head tilted the same direction, always the same. I turned back to Thomas. "Let's go. Now." We started moving again. But something felt wrong. Each step felt heavier, like the forest didn't want us to leave the clearing. Like the soil was clinging to our boots. Behind us, I didn't hear footsteps. I heard breathing. We didn't speak as we pushed forward. The woods closed in tighter now. Branches hung lower. The trees stood closer together than they should have. I had to duck and squeeze through gaps that weren't there minutes ago. Thomas was ahead of me, moving fast, but his head kept twitching like he expected something to grab him from behind. I wanted to tell him to slow down, but I couldn't. Because every time we paused, even for a second, I heard it again. Breathing. Not ours. Something deeper. Wet. Ragged. Like lungs full of water. It stopped whenever we moved. I thought I was imagining it until Thomas froze to check his compass, and the sound started again, closer than before. We didn't wait. We ran. Branches slapped our faces. Roots caught our feet. But we didn't stop. I couldn't even feel the pain in my legs anymore. We finally came to a fallen tree, its massive trunk split wide like it had been struck by lightning. Thomas vaulted over it. I tried, but my foot slipped, and I landed hard on the other side. He pulled me up. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I said. "But keep going." We pushed forward until we found another clearing, smaller this time. Less open. The trees didn't circle this one, they loomed over it like vultures. There was a wooden post in the center. Old. Rotting. And nailed to it, a sign. Faded. Weather-worn. But I could still read the letters burned into the wood. Turn back wasn't an option. Thomas stared at it, then looked at me. "This wasn't here before." "I know." I circled the post. Behind it, half buried in the soil, was a boot. Still laced. Still attached to a foot. I stumbled back. Thomas crouched beside it. Fresh. I tasted bile at the back of my throat. "We need to go around," I said. But he was staring past me. "Don't move," he whispered. I didn't ask why. I didn't turn. I just felt it, the weight of its presence behind me. Close. So close I could feel the heat of its breath on the back of my neck. The sound of it, gurgling. Labored. It took everything I had not to scream. "Ethan," Thomas said slow and low. "On 3, run." I nodded once. 1. The air behind me shifted. 2. The breathing stopped. 3. We ran. We didn't look back. The forest changed while we ran. The trees weren't just tall now, they were wrong. Tilted at angles that hurt to look at. Some twisted into spirals. Others bent downward like they were leaning in to listen. No birds. No wind. Just the sound of our boots slamming into the ground and our ragged breathing cutting through the silence. I don't know how long we ran, but it felt like hours. Finally, Thomas veered left and ducked under a tangle of branches. I followed and found myself inside a hollowed-out tree trunk. Massive. Wide enough for both of us to crouch inside. We stayed there, backs pressed to the inner bark, listening. Nothing. Just the faint sound of the forest behind us shifting. Like something big was moving just out of sight. I leaned toward Thomas. "How does it do that?" "The trees, the landscape, none of it stays the same." He looked exhausted. "It changes when you're not looking. Or maybe it always looks like this, and our minds can't process it." I nodded slowly. "Like it bends reality." He didn't reply. After a minute, he pulled something from his jacket. A lighter. He sparked it once and held it out in front of him. The flame flickered, steady at first, then swayed unnaturally hard to the left. He watched it carefully. "Wind's not real here. Fire points to it." "To what?" "To the way out." We stared at the flame. It held its direction, the tip leaning east, unwavering. He killed the lighter. We followed the flame. We crept out from the trunk and moved in the direction the flame had pointed. This part of the forest was quieter. Not safer, just quieter. But the ground was softer now. Springy. Like we were walking on a thick sponge. I looked down and saw moss. Only it wasn't moss. It was hair. Human hair. Long strands of it, tangled and matted, covering the soil like a carpet. I stopped dead. Thomas turned, saw where I was looking, and said nothing. Just motioned for me to keep moving. We stepped carefully until the trees ahead began to thin. And then we saw it. An old, rusted chain-link fence. It stretched in both directions, disappearing into the woods. The top coiled with barbed wire. A single gate stood in the center, locked tight with a heavy chain and a rusted padlock. Thomas knelt in front of it. This wasn't here before. Is it part of the boundary? I asked. He nodded. Or maybe it's a trap. He stood and looked through the fence. On the other side I saw trees, but they looked different. Real. Imperfect. Leaves missing. Bark chipped. Ground uneven. Normal. I stepped forward. My breath caught. I could smell asphalt. Thomas rattled the fence. The metal groaned, but it held firm. I gripped the padlock and tried pulling it free. Rust crumbled under my fingers, but the chain didn't budge. Then I noticed something carved into the metal frame of the gate. 3 deep scratches. Not from an animal. These were deliberate. Vertical. Like tally marks. I stepped back, suddenly unsure. Thomas moved beside me. We're close. I can feel it. He was right. The air smelled different here, less like mold and rot, more like rain on concrete. Could be a boundary, I said. A way out. He studied the padlock. Old, but not ancient. Someone didn't want whatever's in here getting out. Or someone didn't want us leaving. He pulled out a multi-tool, wedged the tip into the lock, and started working. I turned to watch the forest behind us. The trees were still. Too still. Then something moved. A figure, closer than before. Half hidden in the dark. The same shape. Same tilt of the head. It hadn't stopped following. My voice shook. Hurry up, Thomas. He didn't respond, just kept digging at the lock. The figure took a step forward. Then another. It didn't walk right. Like its feet didn't know how to land. Its arms hung too low. No sound came from it, but I could feel it moving inside my chest, like my ribs were vibrating. Thomas, I said louder. A click. The lock dropped to the ground. We grabbed the gate and pulled. It shrieked as it swung open. I turned to run through it. And stopped. Something was wrong. I looked down. My feet were frozen. Not in fear, literally frozen. The ground beneath me had turned pale. Like frost. My boots were stuck. Thomas grabbed my arm and yanked. I broke free, stumbled forward through the gate. We both collapsed on the other side. The cold vanished instantly. The ground was warm again. Dirt and leaves, not hair. Trees looked real. Birds chirped in the distance. We didn't speak for a while. Then Thomas said something I'll never forget. It didn't try to stop us. I looked at him. What? He was still staring at the gate. It could have. It didn't. And I realized he was right. That thing had followed us for hours. Played with us. Watched us. But the moment we reached the gate, it just stood there. Like it was letting us go. Or worse. Like it wanted one of us to leave. We didn't stop walking until we were deep into what looked like real forest. Normal trees. Dry dirt. Sounds of wind and birds overhead. It all felt possible again. But nothing felt right. Thomas kept checking the compass, even though we were back in familiar terrain. I didn't ask why, because I already knew. He wanted to make sure we hadn't just stepped into another layer of the same trap. I didn't feel relief. Not really. Not when I kept glancing over my shoulder and seeing nothing, but feeling something. It didn't stop at the gate. It followed us. We made it to the service trail after another hour of steady walking. The old utility path was still there, carved out between two rows of wooden posts. A power box stood crooked on a leaning pole, covered in rust and lichen. My phone vibrated. Signal. I nearly dropped it. I opened my map app. It loaded. The blue dot showed our location. I zoomed out. We were less than 2 miles from the main road. And the forest we'd just come from wasn't there. Not even a patch of green. Just a blank spot. Like someone had erased it. Thomas checked his phone too. No trail history. No GPS path. We weren't tracked. I stared at the screen. Then how did we end up there? He didn't answer. We followed the utility path until it spilled out near the road. Asphalt. Cars. The distant hum of civilization. I'd never been so happy to see headlights. A pickup pulled over as we stepped out. An older man leaned out the window. "You boys all right?" he asked. We nodded. He looked behind us. "You come from the forest?" We froze. He saw our hesitation. Then he sighed. "You shouldn't have gone in that far." "You know about it?" Thomas asked. The man glanced down the road, then back at us. "Been here 50 years. Everyone around knows. But we don't talk about it. That place, it ain't for people." "What is it?" The man shook his head. "Something old. Something buried. People go missing. Not just lost, erased. Sometimes something comes back in their place." I felt the blood drain from my face. Thomas leaned on the truck's hood, breathing hard. The man looked at him carefully. Then at me. Then back again. "You boys sure you both made it out?" That question stuck. The man gave us a ride into town. As we pulled away, I looked out the back window. And that's when I saw it. Standing in the tree line. Same height. Same build. Wearing my backpack. The truck's engine hummed steadily as we drove away from the edge of the forest. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Thomas stared out his window, quiet. I could tell he was thinking the same thing. When we reached town, the streets were empty and silent, too quiet for a Saturday night. We checked into a small motel under fake names. I unpacked my backpack and froze. The journal was gone. I turned to Thomas. "Did you take it?" He shook his head, equally confused. Suddenly my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have left. The forest watches. It waits. One of you belongs there." I showed Thomas. His face turned pale. "We need to go back," I said. "No," he replied sharply. "We don't." But deep down, I knew he was wrong. The forest had marked us. It didn't just want to trap us. It wanted to replace us. That night, sleep never came. Outside, shadows moved just beyond the window. And in the silence, I heard it again. The same twisted breathing. Waiting. Watching. The forest never lets go.